Hi, Perform 360 8-week challenges. Ange here from iPerformance Nutrition. And in this recording, we are going to be exploring your Superfuel Pantry list. So this is basically setting your performance kitchen up for success. Basically, I have handpicked the best sources of nutrition for each of the food groups that we have discussed already with building your perfect plates for maximal results. And so now I want you guys to start thinking about doing a little bit of a pantry overhaul. So if you haven't done this already, this is prime time. I need you to get into your kitchens, get into your fridges, and do a really big clear out. So when we overhaul your immediate environment, when it comes to a food perspective, I cannot tell you how often that people bring things into their immediate vicinity and location, and of course they are going to eventually eat it. So we have to make your kitchen the hub of success, and it really starts here, because if you aren't cooking a lot of your meals already, then you are starting a step behind, giving somebody else the control and the power to get your results. So this is something I really want you guys to learn. It is a tool and a skill that I felt so passionately about that we made the Performance Kitchen Workshop a solid part of a practical experience as part of your challenge, because you need to understand that providing yourself with the tools, so setting your pantry up first and having the equipment and the ingredients ready to go, will make your cooking so much easier. So accessibility is the key. When we think about different things in terms of where we store stuff, you are obviously going to have a whole array of stuff that is going to be easy to use at times when you need it. Say, for instance, your pantry staples. So they have less of a shelf, or sorry, they've got more of a shelf life compared to the other stuff in terms of the fresh stuff that you want to be getting, obviously maybe 1 or 2 times during the week. So I understand you are really time poor. So I think as best as we can set you up first and foremost, and then going from that, it'll become easy just to keep a little bit of a record of what you're going low on, and then replace that as we go forward as well. So I want you to have everything at your disposal, yes, but I also, really importantly, want you to actually love what you eat. So this is a big, big thing, and I think it starts with this first. So if you look at these lists and there is something that appeals to you more than something else, then start with that. And you don't have to get every single thing on the list, because I'm not about food wastage, and of course we can't eat everything all at once. We want to just start with the top 3 of your preference choices from my lists, and then we move forward from there. And then over time, I'll get you guys to think about variety and doing something a little bit different, or trying something that you might not have tried before. Because I think, and I say this to my children all the time, it takes a repeated exposure for someone to become familiar with something. And if you think about possibly some food aversions that you've had in the past as kids, you might not have even gone back to those foods, and you're a full-blown adult, and you're still holding on to the anxiety that was caused when that food was eaten initially. So you just haven't given yourself the opportunity to experience things, and it might have been the way it was prepared, or it just might have been a texture thing, or just something that you associated with a really bad and poor experience at the time, and you just haven't gone back to that. So we want to try and break through those barriers a little bit for you guys, and to hopefully get you eating foods that you might be surprised that you like as well. So watch out for that in the workshops. Okay, so just give it a whirl. So the first food group that we're looking at is, of course, your micronutrient and your phytochemical powerhouse, and this is really your vegetables and your fruits. So basically, these are really nutrient dense, low calorie but super high in fiber foods, and for me, I do not have an exclusion list on this. It is literally any fruit, any vegetable you could ever think of is contained in here. I don't want you to be starting to break things up and go, oh, this fruit's better for me because it's got low fructose, or, this vegetable I'll eat because it's green and probably doesn't have as many calories as a red capsicum or something like that. I just want you to give away all those sort of factors that might have compounded your thinking, or stuff that you might have heard along the journey. I really want you just to eat fruit and vegetables, plain and simple. And the more colors, the better. Eat the rainbow, we call it. So there are just a special mention to a few of these that should really be regulars with your fruit and veggie intake time and time again. And these are things such as tomato, and particularly tomato in many forms. So tomato raw, fantastic, but also tomato cooked, and even better cooked in extra virgin olive oil. So we will learn over the course of our cooking workshop that when you cook vegetables, you can release and absorb certain other nutrients that you might not have been able to absorb when you're eating them raw. So it's a really good idea to get a bit of a mix between raw and cooked, and it's totally fine to eat frozen. I get this question a lot of times. Is frozen any more nutritionally superior or less compared to fresh? And to be honest, I actually say sometimes it's actually even better than fresh, depending on where you're getting your fresh produce from. So for a lot of us, we might not have access to farmers markets and local produce, but if you can, that would be great, because what you're looking at is transit time. So basically from farm right through to plate, and obviously the supermarkets, it spends a longer time in transport before you actually consume it. So the quickest and easiest way, and first and foremost, if you don't have access to even if it's a little patch garden at home, I mean, that's the best thing, even over organic for that matter. I think I get that. That's the other question I get asked a lot, is like, is organic fruit and veg better for me? And to be fair, like, I just want to increase your amount. So remember that 5 serves of veggies or salad, 2 serves of fruit every day. I just need to start with that first. There are certain foods that, like I said, if they're just farm fresh and there's less time it takes from them getting picked to being on your table, I would say I'd choose that over organic, to be quite honest. And if it saves you a few dollars, then I'm happy, win-win. So going back, so tomato, definitely the cruciferous vegetables. So these are things like your broccoli, your cabbages, your cauliflower, your Brussels sprouts. I usually call Brussels sprouts mini cabbages. So if you look at them, they resemble very much like a little version of a cabbage. So if you're thinking about these foods and looking at them going, oh my goodness, they are disgusting, I've got an aversion to Brussels sprouts, say for instance, remember, it's all about how you cook them. So we want to be giving you guys some ideas about how to pair that up as well. So we'll talk about that second. And also, you know, this group is particularly high fermentation, so it possibly might give you some gas, a little bit of extra gas in terms of the gut, but if you slowly introduce these and put them in little amounts and then increase that over time goes on, you'll find that the uncomfortableness that you might have experienced in the past when you just rammed them all in straight away eases a little bit, and your body will adapt and get used to that as you start to increase that, but do it progressively, so don't do it all at once. Another special mention to the amazing powerhouse vegetables, the dark green leafy veggies or dark green. So things like, you know, your spinach, your bok choy, your silver beet, your Swiss chard, or your rainbow chard. Sometimes you can pick that up farmers markets, whatever's in season. I don't really mind, guys. Whatever's in season is generally cheaper. So get, and probably has a little bit more nutrition available because it grows in a better condition. So go for stuff like that. That's totally fine. Kale, in relation to spinach, obviously there's baby spinach that you can throw. I would tend to find is really nice whole and raw in salads and a little bit more palatable. But of course, actual English spinach you might want to buy in a frozen, chopped up frozen, you know, if you're cooking it. So there's no point in getting fresh if you're just going to wilt it down and cook it anyway. So that's another avenue that you can explore. And watercress, funnily enough, an amazing high nutrient count, but often not all that accessible. So when they are in season, please watch out for them and add them into things like your salads, or just as garnishes across your meals and things like that too. Speaking of garnishes, alfalfa sprouts are just, and mung bean shoots. So any sprouted seed is phenomenal. It's a live food. It's not often we get, you know, live living foods, and they're just amazing for your gut health as well. So, you know, these sorts of things have really short shelf lives. So I would definitely try to, when you're buying a packet of this, just sprinkle, or a bunch of these, sprinkle on anything and everything you can possibly think of. You know, throwing it into your salads, putting it in sandwiches, throwing it on crackers, you know, boosts your micronutrient intake phenomenally. And it's something that we probably haven't consumed in a long time as well. So remember that as well. If you haven't tried it in a while, go back to popping that sort of stuff within your nutrition plan or on your shopping list. And then, of course, you know, I've been asked this question, of course, a lot of times, and which is why I've included it as a last resort. Yeah, you can have a green supplement powder if you can't get everything in. So generally, if you're hitting that spot majority of times in terms of those the recommended amounts, You don't need it. It's very, very expensive, and I would rather that you eat the food because what's contained in that, of course, is the effectiveness of what those nutrients give you when they are in a whole food sense. So to give you an example, vitamin C was extracted, the same amount of vitamin C was extracted and put into a tablet from an apple. And so what the effectiveness was is the intervention looked at someone taking the vitamin C as a pill, and then of course someone taking the same amount of vitamin C but actually contained in the apple itself, and they found that the response and the effect of the vitamin C was 263 times more effective when it was eaten and consumed as part of the apple. So there is a really big push, and I often say this, guys, is that whole food first. We cannot, nature as it's meant to be intended, without any adulteration or any processing and stuff like that, in its simplest whole form as possible, is the best way that you can go back to eating and living. So as I said, there is the sum is not, sorry, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. So don't look for that supplementation. We've spoken about how supplements make the least amount of difference to your day-to-day results. It's what you eat every day on a regular basis from a whole food perspective that's really going to maximize your effectiveness and your ability to get the best result within this challenge. So please I just wanted to remind you of that. Okay, so that's your fruit and veg, and protein is the next category that we're looking at in terms of storing a really good, accessible point of getting some protein in there, because of course, you know, if we're thinking about the simple six, we're going back to what's going to make the biggest difference. Yes, having those veggies and salad on the plate, having some fruit around training, but also having that lean protein, and especially at breakfast, because I think that's where a lot of the time we miss out on protein as well. So the really great thing about protein is that when we looked at a lot of the maximal fat loss studies, where we found protein to be effective is that if you don't have it within your diet, you will effectively continue to consume calories in general. And if you're not thinking about getting protein in, you're probably likely looking for processed, easy carbohydrates as a default, because they're just easier to get in. And so you will excessively eat calories in the way of carbohydrates or any other food group until you hit your protein quota. So everyone's got this set point of protein. And so if your body doesn't achieve that, you'll just continue to overconsume calories until you hit it. So we need to really hit protein first, because then that's going to actually make us more satiated. So it's going to make sure that we're fuller for longer, and that we don't overconsume on food as well. But also from an athletic perspective, of course, lean protein are those building blocks for repair and recovery, particularly when you're resistance training. So very important to get that in. So the best possible sources, lean meat, okay, if you can get grass-fed or something that's not necessarily organic as such, but that that comes from a local source, is from a farm that's close by, and the cuts that we're particularly looking at are the ones with less visible fat. So something like a fillet steak, a pork loin or medallion. We're looking at cutlets that are trimmed. Kangaroo is actually a really lean, super high in protein and iron source of protein. So this is really something that as our national emblem, is actually quite nutritious for you guys to add into your food, your dietary intake or your food choices. Kangaroo sausages along with that as well, and some premium meat. So really looking at the lower cuts of meat, because of course animal protein is higher in saturated fat, and as a lean source it's still actually about 10% fat, and that is from like I said, a source of fat that we don't want to be consuming lots of, because it's pro-inflammatory, not anti-inflammatory, but having the benefit of obviously the zinc, the creatine, the B vitamins, the micronutrients that are in meat itself, and iron for that matter as well. Really, really nice, high nutrition source to get into our diets. We just want to make sure that we're trimming a lot of that visible fat away as well. So the next one that I have on the list, and this is by no means in order of preference, it's just literally listed, is once again your lean or your skinless poultry. If you can access free range and it's within the budget, great. But if not, then normal stuff is totally fine as well. Chicken or turkey mince, turkey steak. There's actually turkey sausages that you can get now that are super lean as well. Or things like lovely legs. You know, if you're looking at casserole dishes and thigh for curries and things like that, obviously a little bit higher fat content. But if you can get it skinless, it's totally fine to add in for a good protein source. Eggs are probably the only one that I will stress and stipulate that it needs to be free range, organic, or enriched with omega-3, because eggs are very susceptible to whatever the environment that the chook is in, the hen is in, then translates across to the actual yolk itself. So I very much stress that you pay for quality when it comes to eggs, and the best thing you could do is just maybe get some friends that own some chooks and just grab some eggs off some home yard chooks or some farm chooks as well. So like I said, it doesn't need to be free range as such, but if you've got access to getting ones that they will have a really good appropriate feed, so what they're feeding them is quite appropriate, then we really want to be getting that in and choosing those appropriate eggs. So the other one that we're going to do is, the other group that I'm looking at now, moving down the list, is something like seafood. So obviously things like seafood in the relation to prawns and scallops, bugs and oysters, so crustaceans, but also looking at white and oily fish as well. So particularly the oily fish, because if you do look for these sorts of darker cuts of fish, you are more likely that they are going to contain things like DHA, EPA, omega-3s, and this is the really good fats that we want to be getting for brain function, for good fuel, for really just enhancing your recovery as well in that anti-inflammatory sense. And also, you know, white fish in particular is a great source of high protein with less calories as well. So great option to have in there. And so I've listed a couple of, you know, the best versions of fish, but to be fair, like anything that you can access is great. It's just getting a good sort of fishmonger or getting out there and going fishing. How about that? Cool. Okay, so moving forward, dairy, and now we've got a wonderful array of high protein dairy, which is super exciting at the moment. So we can access things that are called strained yogurts. So in particular, we have a few different brands that are accessible. Chobani, Rokeby Farms is another great one. The YoPro is another one, Skia. Yeah, so just have a look for these sorts of things in the supermarket now. They will advertise themselves as high protein yogurts. They've been strained. When it comes to this and using it as a protein option, I would always recommend a natural or a plain, and then you can make it either sweet or savory depending on what dish you're putting it in. It makes a great alternative for things like sour cream in, you know, like Mexican dishes and stuff like that. Totally good, totally easy to do, and a wonderful source of nutrition, and also a great way to boost up, say for instance, a breakfast meal by adding some dairy into your breakfast to boost the protein up if you're not doing a savory breakfast as such. And then, of course, we've got our vegetarian sources of protein. So looking at our legumes, so our beans in any form, any beans for that matter, and lentils as well, particularly fall into that category. Tofu and tempeh are wonderful high sources of protein. And we've got a wonderful product at the moment called Lupin Flakes. So this has been released. It is 40% protein. It's stuff that's very versatile. So when you look at it, it's a bit like a coarse flour, and you can add it into your cooking. You can add it into your grains by cooking it with rice. You can make mueslis out of it, granolas out of it. You can use it as coating when you're doing things like crumbing chicken or fish. And it's a really lovely way to get a plant-based protein in, a very versatile way of doing it. You could also have it as a porridge, for instance, as a breakfast as well. So a very versatile legume that is super high in protein as well. So really good look out for that one. And then, of course, we need to be convenient as well. So things like your protein powders and your shakes are really just a nice way, just conveniently, to boost up your protein intake if you just can't eat everything all the time, every time. And so adding things like a whey protein isolate or concentrate, or a vegan protein powder if you want to go plant-based that has a combination of a sprouted rice and pea protein in it, is a really nice way to sort of boost everything up, particularly in smoothies, in like breakfast porridges, and just even bircher mueslis and things like that. So I definitely would recommend having a protein powder on hand. And obviously as part of Perform 360, we have this very accessible for you guys to purchase with the Raw Amazonia range here as well. So make use of that. But yeah, just really nice and easy to have a whole blend of array of protein sources that you can add into your cooking to really boost that protein content, because of course that's very important for you guys. So moving forward, next on our pantry list is looking at the best sources of starch-based carbohydrate. I've said this time and time again, we want foods that are minimally processed, ones that have super high in fiber, and they of course are the whole grains, the ones that we can really see the whole coating of the grain, the whole grain itself, and it's contained in this, or something that's at least brown in terms of increased in fiber from that perspective as well. We know we really want to periodize these starchy carbs within the first 1 to 2 hours of our training, so we know that our body's maximally susceptible to taking them on board, filling up our glycogen stores in our muscles, restoring our liver glycogen as well, and also giving our brain some fuel and some function to push forward with. So the best sources that we're looking at potato, and it can be white potato or sweet potato, totally fine. Corn or pumpkin fall into that list. And I know you're going to tell me, but Ange, that's a vegetable. But in reality, when we looked at the breakdown, it's predominantly most of that nutrition is coming from a carbohydrate sense compared to other vegetables. So that's why they are contained within your starchy carbohydrate list. And please leave the skin on, if I didn't mention that before, with all your potatoes and sweet potatoes with cooking. If you can, roasting them is a great way to do that. They're still edible. Add a little bit of olive oil to it to help digestion and facilitate the processing and the absorption of nutrients. But definitely you could look to do that with cooking those sorts of starchy carbohydrates in the form of vegetables. The other great grains I love are oats, rolled oats, whole rolled oats, quinoa, things like rice flakes, obviously a little bit more processed, but it's an option, or rice puffs as well, that you can find from a breakfast perspective. Or some sort of natural muesli, so that one that has pretty simple ingredients and has no extra fillers or additives or processing from that matter. You could also use quinoa flakes, for instance, as well, or you could use the whole quinoa grain itself, even as a breakfast porridge as well. So they're really good grains to have on hand. Now, rice in any form, but the highest fiber rice we're looking at a brown, a wild, a red or black, or a basmati rice. So that's a really important one to get in and have, and they're really easily accessible nowadays. If you even can't cook it, they're in steam fresh packs, so keep a couple of those in the back of the cupboard. But obviously rice is super cheap. If you just cooked up a whole big batch and divvied it up, you can actually keep them in the freezer and they'll stay reasonably quite good, and when you're ready to eat them, you can just defrost them and go for it. Wholemeal spelt or pulse pasta. So pulse pasta is really interesting. It's using chickpeas and grains and legumes in creating the pasta itself. So San Remo has a great range and a great variety of that. And of course, that's in the supermarket, but of course, your specialty shops will have things like, black bean fettuccine and stuff like that. So you might want to be looking at those higher protein or higher fiber pastas to add something different into your cooking as well. So noodles we're looking at, any sort of rice noodle, egg noodle, or whole wheat noodle. Soba noodle is a great example as well, based on buckwheat or a combination of wheat and buckwheat. Nice little different in terms of staple pantry item. We're looking at bread, so there is definitely a hierarchy when it comes to bread. So a whole grain obviously first, or something that's rice, spelt, or based on a sourdough method of fermentation and rising and cooking. So a lot of your artisan breads within your markets or your specialty bakeries will have this, without a doubt. Even I've seen at Baker's Delight, they've got a whole range of grain sourdough breads now, or a Cape seed, something like that, that looks really nutrient dense. It's a bit of a brick to sort of, when you tap it, you've got that high nutrient density within those breads, and they're totally fine. And of course, if you are celiac and you can't digest gluten, or if you're particularly sensitive and susceptible to it, choosing a gluten-free is fine, but you also need to get one that has a grain in it. So a grain gluten-free bread would be ideal. Barley or grain wraps or whole wheat tortillas. So looking at what's available in the supermarkets as, you know, a means to sort of wrap food up in, or have something like nachos and have, you know, a nicer, healthier version of things to dip it in as well. So don't be shy of those sorts of things, and using them as bases for really, you know, homemade pizzas and doing really nice stuff, foods that you can really enjoy, but doing it with a performance aspect mind of going, well, what's the best source of, you know, food group that I can add to this and use it as a base. So that's another great idea. Legumes are, of course, in the starchy carbohydrate list, and I also have them in the protein list. Obviously, if you're following a plant-based diet, you would consider them as your protein option. But for people that are consuming animal proteins and dairy, and you're happy and fine to do that, then you might want to use legumes as a carbohydrate, and that's totally fine to do in there as well. The most easiest and convenient way that I've boosted up people's carbohydrate intake when they have salads and they feel a little bit empty after the salads is just to get one of those 125 gram tins of 4 bean mix and rinse it. So drain it, rinse it, and then just pop it into your salads. It's a really good, easy option to have that in and to boost your nutrition, particularly when you're looking at stuff that doesn't need cooking. And then, of course, fruit. Fruit is a wonderful form of carbohydrate. Fresh or frozen, doesn't matter. As I said, the same sort of appeal goes with, like I said, with the vegetables as in the fruit. If it's picked and frozen and immediately, then you're probably likely that it's really high in terms of nutrition as well. It's also great from a convenience sake. And I love using frozen fruit in smoothies because it gives us a really nice texture, and it's really quite... you know, easy, accessible, and it doesn't go to waste. That's the biggest thing, is that you can have it in there, and you know, it could be a week before you use it and you aren't throwing anything out. They haven't gone bad. Okay, so healthy fats is the next one that we need to be looking at in terms of category. Obviously, I've harped on about this, guys, in terms of anti-inflammatory effects and looking at a hormonal balance as well. So remembering that when we go on a low-fat diet, we actually don't produce testosterone. So, well, we stop producing it at a high level because we need fat to generate fat-soluble and steroidal hormones within our body. So we really need to be thinking about these sorts of things when we're stripping away energy that we could be stripping away ways in which your body can actually enhance its metabolism or metabolic rate. And of course, brain function. So fat coats all the myelin sheaths within our brain nerve conduction system, so it gives us the ability to think really well. So we really want to be adding lots of our monounsaturated, polyunsaturated fat, so basically just unsaturated in general, into our everyday meals, and obviously let saturated fat be a byproduct of what you are normally consuming with your animal based products as well. So definitely maximizing things like extra virgin olive oil. There are so many wonderful, beautiful nutritional properties to that I cannot stipulate enough that it must be a staple in your pantry, and that is definitely an extra virgin olive oil that we want to be choosing, so something that's cold pressed and first pressed if you can. It's just wonderful to enhance everything that you're doing in terms of the way of your kitchen. So some poly examples are things like hemp seeds, you know, something a bit different. So obviously you've got your chia seeds that are accessible at the moment, but you might want to use some linseeds or flax seeds, you know, peanuts and walnuts, Brazil nuts, sunflower, canola oil are in there, and fish oil supplements in your polys, but I would definitely tend to, if you're going to be buying oils in that description, I would definitely go with extra virgin olive oil as a staple anyway to start. And then the saturated ones are the animal fats found in egg, milk, yogurt, cheese, butter, and of course coconut oil is a vegetable that has the saturated fat component, and whilst it's a different chain, it's a medium chain triglyceride as opposed to a long chain triglyceride in the animal fats, it's still saturated, so it still is conducive to increasing your inflammation. So we just want to be having less of those things and let it be a byproduct of just things that we have day to day within our meals or our cooking anyway in a smaller amount. So the last thing, of course, because it's part of the Simple Six, is your hydrating fluid, and making sure that you're getting at least 1 to 2 glasses and cups of water in every single meal and snack that you have. It's, of course, going to help satiety, help fill you up, and it's a wonderful way to sort of get rid of everything in your system and keep everything ticking over effectively, and helping your liver to detoxify everything it does with all the stuff that we throw at our cells day in, day out. So it enhances all of our cell functions, and obviously we understand from a sports perspective that if we are more than 2% dehydrated to start an exercise session with, we will actually be at a performance deficit. So very important that we start looking and focusing on this. So water is obviously the main fluid we need to drink. We want to be having more than those 1 to 2 cups in every meal and snack if we are thirsty or if we are exercising more. So we generally say for every 1 kilo loss on the scale in terms of sweat rate, you are to be replenishing at least 1.5 times that. So within the next couple of hours after you've finished training. So if you've lost 1 kilo in an hour session, you're looking to replace 1.5 liters of water within the next couple of hours. So really be mindful of getting that early, getting that on board early, and of course to help that is the use of electrolytes, which I've suggested for a few of the athletes, particularly if you are training in hot conditions and environments and different seasons of the year. It's important that you might want to help that with a few little electrolytes, which is just an effervescent tablet that you put into your drink bottle to help and engage your thirst drive, but also help you to retain that water as well. A really quick and easy thing to do would be just to assess how many times a day that you go to the toilet. So if that's 5 or 6 times, you're probably doing great. If it's any less than that, you're probably not having enough fluid. And also having a look at the color of your urine. So in the toilet, if you are looking at we're aiming to get a straw or a pale yellow colored urine. And if it's any darker than that, it means that you are dehydrated and you really do need extra fluid in your day. And if it's any lighter than that, you might possibly want to cut it back a little bit because, of course, the more we drink and we don't retain, then we just weed out. So yeah, we don't want to be running to the toilet every 2 seconds. We really want to be maximizing the absorption of the fluid that we are actually consuming. And that's actually made better when we have it with our meals and our snacks that have a natural element of sodium in it. So after water, and that could be mineral water or plain water as well, that's fine. Then we're looking at choosing tea, of course, herbal tea, and then maybe black tea with a little bit of milk, or coffee for that matter. And, you know, when we look at caffeine, I mean, it is a legal drug, it is a performance enhancer. When we're looking at, you know, using it in around training, it actually decreases your perception of effort. So it's a really good I would call supplement of some description, but it's also very enjoyable to consume as a brew, obviously. And so we want to be looking at creating a little bit of an environment where you're not really effectively getting over 500 milligrams of caffeine per day. So if, to give you an idea, 1 instant coffee for a teaspoon of instant coffee, it's about 50 milligrams of caffeine, or an espresso shot, if you were to go to a cafe, barista made coffee is about 70 milligrams of caffeine. So from a sports performance perspective, we generally say 2 to 3 times your body weight, 2 to 3 grams per body weight of caffeine is what you're sort of aiming to achieve. And that's really not something that you want to focus too much on if you have never used caffeine as a pre-workout or a primer. I would just say if you're going to have caffeine, it's really nice and important to have it just before training. And so, yeah, that might be just something that you might want to think about strategically and say, I'm going to have my coffee just before I'm about to train. It's generally best taken about 60 minutes prior, because once it reaches its peak, it should be petering off from there, but that would be probably just about the time when you guys do the finisher. So it's a good time to put it in there. So yeah, so don't go over 500 milligrams, or about 3 sort of standard coffees a day is probably where you want to be capping that, because of course caffeine makes us more alert, and if we're doing that around times where we want to be calming down and going to sleep, we really want to be getting effective sleep for that recovery. So that's really important. Please, I can't stress enough as well to be avoiding artificially sweetened drinks, even if they're low calories and we go, oh, you know, that's not contributing to my energy intake. It sets up a neural drive that wants you to continually go back to it. And it was also a lot of the sugars that they use, in particular, sorbitol, is not great on your guts, so they operate a little bit as a laxative effect. And so I generally, as a rule of thumb, if it's a diet version of something, it's not any healthier for you from that perspective. If you wanted to flavor your water up, think about squeezing stuff like lime juice, or even fresh orange juice for that matter, just squeezing a little bit in just to change the flavor of your waters, and that's effectively enough. But really want you guys to get used to just dumbing down that that sweet drive, because of course when we look at sugar and its response, and not in relation to artificial sweetener but just in general, it sets up a brain function that's very similar to a cocaine hit. And when we're looking at those pleasure centers in our brain, this is why we get addicted to things that are heavily processed when it comes to sugar, and it becomes quite addictive and very hard for us to remove that from our diet. And that even goes, for instance, if you are having lots of teas and coffees in the day and you're having maybe 1 or 2 teaspoons of sugar with every one of those cups, it's a considerable amount if you add that up over the course of the day. And if we relate that then back to, say, a 250 ml soft drink with 9 teaspoons of sugar, or a 600 ml Gatorade, which is the equivalent in terms of sugar content, it's really unnecessary liquid energy that we don't need unless you are really operating at high level, in which case, 90 minutes or plus of exercise for a long duration. So definitely not something that you guys want to put in there as well. We are very mindful that this is a challenge. So from an alcohol perspective, I mean, I really am, I want this to be sustainable for you. So, alcohol, definitely there is room for alcohol within a diet nutrition plan, and it can be nutritious. But when I look at this from a perspective of stepping it up a level, we really want to be avoiding or being really conscious to minimize our alcohol content, and not from a perspective of reducing energy, but because of course there's no real nutritional value in a lot of alcohol, despite possibly red wine, which has some phytonutrients in there that are quite good because of resveratrol, so from the skin of the grapes, that has given us a really nice antioxidant property. But of course it comes down to how much you're consuming. So because it's still got alcohol, so there's still an alcohol content in it, it is exorbitant in calories. And the other thing is that it's the only fluid that will dehydrate you. So we're just talking about fluids that hydrate you. And in saying that, like I said, tea and coffee are totally fine. So we know that caffeine dehydrates us by 1 milligram by 1 mil, but because of course you're having a lot more fluid when you're having things like coffee and tea, it counteracts that as well. So you're still pro-hydrating, whereas alcohol you are definitely not. And because it is recognized as a toxin, your body needs, or your liver needs, to process that and get rid of it first. So what it does is it puts everything else on hold while it does that. So anything that you're consuming food-wise, it will just pop just into a storage section, and then it needs to process that alcohol and get it out of your system, and then go back to then processing the other food. So particularly it hinders recovery as well, because it's really pro-inflammatory, just like those saturated fats. So if it will aggravate your muscles even more, and of course it's dehydrating. So when I'm looking at it from the sports performance perspective, definitely choose wisely when you're doing this sort of stuff or consuming alcohol, because you really don't want to be doing it around a key session where you've gone out pretty hard in that, because it's definitely not going to be enhancing your recovery, and in some ways it'll put you back. Okay, so just be mindful that alcohol, like I said, it's in there, but I'm really looking for minimal amounts for you guys, particularly over the 8 weeks. And that's it, guys. So I hope this has given you enough knowledge now to go in and just get excited and rip up the pantries and the kitchens and dump anything that you don't need or give it away, and really make it an environment where your results will thrive. So this is the hub of what you want to be doing. Go in, get it done, and let me know. Send me pictures, pop some pictures up on the Facebook group. I love seeing wonderful pantries and fridges, for that matter, and shops, shopping expeditions and stuff like that. If we get some really cool ideas from different people, I love all that sort of stuff as well. So please contribute to the community, and I will see you guys soon.